Yeah, good to know, huh? I thought you were opening and I would introduce Peter, but that's cool. So you're going to do the Q&A then too?
This looks like a USG event.
Both up there?
You two alone on the stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I have no recollection of anything that's written before I saw the piece of paper, so I can simply tell you what is on the piece of paper is I am giving an intro for Peter, and then I go away.
Got it. So I'll just do the Q&A.
You're
Okay.
introducing the whole thing.
I'll introduce myself and open the event. Turn it to Kat.
No, I'll open. That's good. That's good.
You're
Yeah.
gonna have a scary clown.
Well, I heard this morning that, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Test and test.
thanks everybody for coming out today. My name is Rick Rosso. I hold the Wadhwani Chair in U.S. India Policy Studies here at the Center for Strategic International Studies. And we're here today to launch a new report that my program, along with Kath Hicks, who runs the security program here at CSIS, have been working on together for a little bit over 1 year. This started back my early days at CSIS, and Kath actually had the great idea that of all the great work that had been done studying the U.S.-India Defense Partnership, most of that predated the election of Prime Minister Modi. And I think we all saw that there was a new ceiling and new thresholds on what could possibly be accomplished in U.S.-India security policy. So this was Kath's idea initially, and we approached the MacArthur Foundation, who gratefully came back and agreed to help to fund this study. So it's the product of over a year of work. Probably started with a really high point too, with a great study group mission that we took to New Delhi a little bit over a year ago. And I see a few people that participated in that, Rahul, and I know Ingrid and Rob and many others had joined us for that program about a year ago. Finally, a year later, that was an early high point. A year later, we have the report prepared. There are copies that we have available, but also you can find it online. So before we have our chief guest, Peter Lavoy from the National Security Council, allow me to introduce our colleague, John Schaus, who's a fellow with the National Security Program, who's going to articulate some of the highlights from the report as really the study lead for the report. So John, please join me on stage. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here and being with us. I should also note, before I get too far into my remarks, that before all of our events at CSIS, we do a safety announcement. If anything should happen, I will let you know what to do, or if Rick is on stage, he will let you know what to do. There's emergency exits behind me or in front, depending on what happens. We don't expect anything, but we just wanted to be upfront about the possibility. So, as Rick mentioned, we are here primarily to gain wisdom from Dr. Peter Lavoy, but in part to highlight the report that we have just published today on the prospects for future U.S.-India security cooperation. And I'll take just a few minutes to run through the key elements of our report and look forward to discussion after Dr. Lavoy's presentation on any questions or comments anyone may have. In addition to the thank yous that Rick just offered to the people who are here who joined us to launch the event in Delhi, I also want to thank Sarah Watson, Andrew Metrick, and Natalie Tessimer, who were an excellent study team in pulling all of this work together. So with that, let me launch into the drivers of the study. As Rick said, looking at this new set of parameters that the United States and India were operating within after the election of Prime Minister Modi. But looking forward to the end of an Obama administration where we no longer could count on a strong president to prime minister relationship to be the sole driver of the relationship. So what we tried to do in this study is to find key issues that both countries could focus on and drive progress to sustain the level of momentum we have seen thus far. So my remarks are going to focus basically follow the contours of our study. First, looking at U.S. and Indian national outlooks, how these are converging in many ways, not all. Second, strategic issues for cooperation. And third, our recommendations. So first, national outlooks. The United States and India have seen convergence of strategic interests in many areas over the past probably 10 to 15 years. But these have really started to surface after Prime Minister Modi's election. Some of these, as many of you will know, are defense cooperation, growing alignment in cybersecurity vision, counterterrorism, and many, many others. All one has to do is look at the consistency of issues highlighted in the joint vision statements to see how these issues are converging over time. In addition, it struck us as a study group that changing domestic and regional drivers are shifting India's sights to expand from a domestic focus and even from a regional focus to see a broader role for India outside of just its own specific region. And we're seeing this play out in the greater Indian Ocean region, in Southeast Asia, in Northeast Asia, and increasingly even in the Middle East. And in our conversations both in Washington and in Delhi, it seemed that India is seeing greater opportunity to partner with the United States in certain ways in each of these areas. But the cooperation is not just geographic. The United States and India have numerous areas of strategic cooperation that they are focusing on. To touch on several that are highlighted in our report, the largest overall, I think, is, perhaps being a defense analyst, I'm biased, but it seems to be defense cooperation right now. We're seeing this through the breadth and the depth of defense dialogues, starting with the frequent contacts between the defense minister and the Secretary of Defense, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years. But this also carries throughout the bureaucracies to the Defense Policy Group talks, chaired at the undersecretary level in the United States, as well as many, many staff-level talks and dialogues that are creating channels for greater communication and for highlighting areas to cooperate. We're also seeing greater defense cooperation in our military exercises. There are numerous military exercises. Some of the marquee kind of top of the ledger items in that space are the naval exercise Malabar, the Marine Corps exercise Shatrujit, and the Army exercise Yudabas. But it's not just bilateral engagements on the military exercise front, it's also multilateral engagements where India and the United States partner with the ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meeting Plus, ADMM Plus, working groups to conduct exercises with 18 other countries in Southeast Asia and the partner countries, and India's participation in exercises like the Rim of the Pacific, RIMPAC, which it did this past summer. India is stepping out in ways that were probably not expected 10 to 15 years ago, and the United States, I think, is working hard to try and ensure that that step by India, those efforts by India, are leading to greater cooperation bilaterally. Most of you here are more than versed with the concept of the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, or the current version, the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, which is really an innovative approach connecting the United States and India on defense technology, defense trade issues. It's more than commerce. It's pilot projects. It's efforts within and between the bureaucracies, the defense establishments in both countries, to explore and pioneer how might those two establishments work together to enhance cooperation, to lead to co-production or co-development of mutually beneficial items. And then also within, or as alongside the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, there is expanding defense trade, full stop trade. We've seen examples of that with the C-130 and the P-8 deals, where India is now operating a host of U.S.-made equipment, which is greatly amplifying India's domestic and indigenous defense capabilities. Moving now to a second area, counterterrorism. India has long suffered from terrorism and insurgency problems, both domestically driven and that spurred from foreign places. And finding ways for the United States and India to deepen cooperation, particularly after 9/11, has been an area of growing focus. We think that there are ways that both countries can leverage and learn from each other's experience to enhance that cooperation, and it could be a key area for cooperation in the future. And the second to last strategic issue, narcotics and illicit drug flows. Not often considered a security issue and certainly not a defense issue, but the challenges of narcotics trafficking, of drug trafficking, of addiction, whether to legal or illegal drugs, is a common challenge for both countries. And finding ways to cooperate to reduce the risks and to commonly identify the challenges, we think could be a fruitful area for additional efforts in the future. Two last common outlook challenges. First, in cyber, the United States and India have great technology sectors, private sectors, and while military cooperation on cyber may be difficult for security and political reasons, enhancing opportunities for commercial cyber cooperation is important. And last, space. India has a very robust space program, which it is rightly proud of. The United States has restrictions on what it can do to cooperate with that program based on U.S. policy and international agreements. But there's a lot we can do short of that on specific systems, on subsystems, on sensors, on satellites and payloads in areas such as weather, agriculture, and climate. That would greatly enhance both countries. But all relationships aren't just positive and aren't just opportunity. The United States and India have a number of risks in their relationship that we highlight in the report. Here I will only talk through 3 briefly for time reasons, but we have 6 important risk factors that we highlight. But the 3 I'd like to focus on are the risk of an up or down U.S. litmus test. The United States there is a perception within many folks within India that the United States, as we deepen the relationship, may at some point say, you're either with us or you're against us. And that is a fear within India that is slowing its, or moderating, I think, its engagement with the United States in ways that over time we can work through, but we need to be cognizant of that different perception, and U.S. policymakers, as we go forward, should be careful not to create that perception. Second, we've seen the positives of extremely high levels of senior leader engagement between the United States and India, with the President and the Prime Minister meeting frequently, the Secretaries of Defense and the Minister of Defense meeting frequently, and others. The flip side of that is, without that senior level, sustained, frequent engagement, can the relationship continue to make progress? And so we need to find ways, as the new U.S. administration takes office, to send the signals needed to sustain that engagement. And then the third I'll highlight here, the U.S. and India are both large, complex democracies. As a result, and because of our history, we have a complicated relationship with one another. I think it's been clear over the last 10 to 15 years that both countries have worked to focus our areas of cooperation and focus our areas of disagreement to avoid spillover, so that divergent views in one area don't stop cooperation in other areas. And sustaining that type of focus will be important for the next administration. So with that, let me briefly run through our 6 near-term recommendations, and then I will turn it over to my boss, Dr. Kathleen Hicks, to introduce Dr. Lavoy. So we have 6 recommendations. First, that within the first 100 days of the next U.S. president's term, he or she should meet with Prime Minister Modi. It doesn't have to be a state visit. It doesn't have to be a large orchestrated trip, but somewhere, somehow, that they need to meet to send a signal of importance of the relationship and continued cooperation and focus. Second, both countries need to ensure that the outstanding defense cooperation agreements, which we often call the foundational agreements in the United States, that these are signed quickly. These are things like the logistics cooperation agreement, the geospatial intelligence sharing information. These types of agreements are basically, they're tax reducers, so that it is much easier to cooperate and the bureaucratic hurdles to that cooperation are lower. Signing those early will be a strong signal, and it will facilitate other types of cooperation. Third, the U.S. and India should work to establish a quadrilateral security dialogue with the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. And the 4 countries together should work to identify common challenges that can be focused on and addressed in a 2 to 4 year period. 2 to 4 years so that countries can both align resources and objectives, and that administrations can both identify a problem or a challenge and make progress towards resolution within the term of the administration. Fourth, work with India to enhance naval capabilities within and beyond the Indian Ocean, particularly on maritime domain awareness. There are a number of ways this can be done. It can be greater interoperability with U.S. forces. It could be co-production or co-development of maritime domain awareness sensors for airborne platforms, manned or unmanned. Could take any number of directions. Fifth, clarify rules for the 100% foreign direct investment threshold for the defense sector. We have seen statements from India saying it is now possible if certain criteria are met, but we haven't seen enough elaboration on what those criteria are. And further elaboration would facilitate, I think, a greater exchange between not just the United States and India, but many countries, private sectors, and India. And then finally, we think it is important to strengthen the Homeland Security dialogue. This has been a periodic but somewhat lapsed dialogue over the past several years. It can focus on issues such as counterterrorism, on border security, on information exchanges. It can focus on ways that both countries can leverage emerging technologies to enhance those issues. But it is an area where we get the sense that there is opportunity, but both countries will need to lean in somewhat to get there. We go also in our report, we have a number of midterm recommendations, things that could be achieved in 2 to 4 years. In the interest of time, I will leave those out, but I encourage you to go to csis.org. The report is there, and you can see it all. With that, I'd like to introduce my boss, Dr. Kathleen Hicks. She's the former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, along with many, many other jobs within the Defense Department over a distinguished career. Currently, she is the Director of the International Security Program, the Henry Kissinger Chair holder, and a Senior Vice President here at CSIS. Kath.
Thanks very much to John for that great briefing of the report. I do encourage you to go to csis.org if you're here in the room. Hopefully you've picked up a copy, but if you're joining us online, please do check out the report. There's a lot of depth there. And I do want to take just a moment to thank John and Rick and his team, Sarah and Natalie, and all those who've contributed to the analysis. Oftentimes in the think tank world, you're sort of perversely lucky when not much good is happening in an area because there's a lot of rich stuff to work off of. This is an exception to that case, and to the extent that the U.S. government in the last several years has properly and well taken advantage of the opportunity presented by shifts inside India, I think a lot of that credit can go to Dr. Peter Lavoy, who we have here today as our keynote speaker. Peter, I know from the Defense Department, I sound like I can't keep a job by the description of one of many jobs, but in several of my previous jobs, Peter and I have had, I've had the pleasure of working with Peter. He came before DOD from his own variety of pathways, but most notably from the intelligence community, and Peter is a long established and well-known expert on South Asia. And today, he is the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for South Asia on the National Security Council. As I said, Peter has been at the forefront of the efforts of this administration to move forward on the security cooperation relationship and beyond that nomenclature with India. What we're going to do here is we're going to have Peter give some opening comments, and then Rick and Peter are going to sit down together. You can't quiz Peter about our report. You can quiz Rick about our report, but also we really ask that you focus your energies, if you will, on talking to Peter, and check out our report online and send us comments online if you have some to follow up on. So without further ado, please join me with your applause in welcoming Peter Lavoy.
Thank you, Kath. It's great to see you again, and other colleagues that I used to work with in the Pentagon, great colleagues, and there are plenty of people out here that I work with today in the U.S. government. And really, I think you all deserve much of the credit for the great strides we've made in this administration in deepening and expanding our security partnership with India. I really enjoyed reading this report. I read it cover to cover. It's fascinating, and I strongly encourage everybody else to read it. I think it contains some very good ideas, not only for the next administration, but continuing this administration. We have another 3+ months to go, and we're going to work really hard, including on this very issue. I'm not going to comment on each and every finding, although tempted to do so. That's really for our successors to do. But I'm pleased to observe that the vision you map out in this study is entirely consistent with the goals and initiatives that this administration has pursued. And I'm pleased that your report encourages the next team to build on the considerable successes of the Obama administration to deepen and expand the U.S. India strategic partnership. I'm confident that the next team will take up this challenge because there's such a compelling case to be made that India truly counts in world affairs. And I want to go back to 1949 in a speech that then Prime Minister Nehru gave, and he spoke about why India must be taken seriously. He said, "In regard to any major problem of a country or a group of countries of Asia, India has to be considered, whether it's a problem of defense or trade or industry or economic policy. India cannot be ignored. She cannot be ignored because her geographical position is a compelling reason. She cannot be ignored also because of her actual or potential power and resources. Whatever her actual strength may or may not be, India is potentially a very powerful country and possesses the qualities and other factors that go a long way to make a country grow strong, healthy, and prosperous." Nearly 70 years later, Nehru's vision is coming to fruition. And this is recognized not just by our administration, but on both sides of the aisle in Congress and throughout our foreign policy establishment. Let me be specific, more specific about the reasons why India matters to all of us and to the Obama administration. India matters economically like never before. With over 1/6 of the world's population, South Asia is home to 800 million youth under 30, and they will shape Asia for decades to come. And they will be the engine of one of the world's most dynamic economies. As a trading nation, we rightly take notice that half of the world's GDP will be contained in Asia by 2050. India is the world's fastest growing major economy, and there is significant enthusiasm for our economic relationship in both countries. India matters geographically. India sits at the center of the Indian Ocean, through which 40% of global trade flows. From energy security to counter-piracy to counter-proliferation, we have reason to focus on the Indian Ocean as important to our own security. In a region such as the Indian Ocean, where there is a thin architecture of institutions, U.S. India partnership and presence can be a public good that benefits all. India matters politically. As the world's oldest and largest democracies, we share a broad convergence in values. We see this in India's vibrant civil society and its plurality of religions, cultures, and traditions. And we see it in our shared commitment to, as the Indian Constitution puts it, the dignity of the individual. And India matters on a rapidly growing spectrum of global issues. The United States welcomes the more prominent and effective role India is playing to solve a wide range of world problems, from climate change and global health to peacekeeping, maritime security, and cyber governance. We welcome India not just because it is consequential, but because we share and often promote common norms about a rules-based order. The U.S.-India partnership has come a long way in the last 8 years, but I believe the best years are still to come. We are handing over to the next team a major defense partnership with India, and I want to highlight 3 dimensions of this vibrant, dynamic relationship. First, a growing convergence on regional issues. Second, deepening cooperation on technology and defense trade. And third, a broadening security partnership. In 2010, President Obama stood before the Indian Parliament and declared the U.S.-India relationship would be a defining partnership for the 21st century. Over the next 6 years, the administration took up that challenge, undertaking an unprecedented whole-of-government effort to expand engagement with India. As I look back over those 6 years, I've witnessed not only our governments coming into closer contact, but more significantly, a growing convergence of views of the common risks, threats, and opportunities we face. In part, this convergence has come about because we've made monumental efforts to overcome specific areas of mistrust. It's worth recalling that 10 years ago, the 3 most contentious issues in our relationship were nuclear, space, and access to high technology. Today, the U.S. nuclear firm Westinghouse is negotiating to build nuclear power reactors in Andhra Pradesh that will provide reliable access to electricity for an estimated 60 million people. NASA and ISRO have collaborated to discover water on the moon and supported efforts to explore Mars. And only 1% of U.S. exports to India require a license, compared to nearly a quarter in 2000. But the other reason for this convergence is that, recognizing the underlying logic for our relationship, we've built habits of cooperation in discussing the challenges we face. We talk to our Indian counterparts about nearly every problem in the world. We don't always see eye to eye, but we have a growing appreciation for each other's interests and perspectives, and we want to work together. 3 regions where this cooperation has gained momentum are in the Asia-Pacific, Afghanistan, and Africa. The U.S. rebalance to Asia and India's Act East policy are vivid examples of both our shared strategic outlook for the Asia-Pacific region and our shared interests in promoting regional peace and security. In 2015, President Obama and Prime Minister Modi announced a joint strategic vision for the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean, highlighting our shared values in this part of the world. In particular, the JSV affirms the importance of safeguarding maritime security and ensuring freedom of navigation and overflight, especially in the South China Sea. Under this framework, our governments have worked extensively to map out a set of common priorities against terrorism, piracy, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction that will guide our activities for years to come. To advance these priorities, the U.S. is committed to ensuring that India is more meaningfully connected to East Asia, including its security architecture, ADMM+. We have strengthened our regional dialogues and focused the India, U.S., Japan trilateral on concrete outcomes to improve our cooperation on a wide range of issues, including humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and to enhance global and regional connectivity. With 1/3 of the world's bulk cargo and 2/3 of oil shipments passing through the Indian Ocean, maritime security is a key area of cooperation. Recognizing the immense potential for collaboration in the maritime domain, earlier this year we launched the inaugural U.S. India Maritime Security Dialogue. At an operational level, our naval engagements continue to improve the cooperation of U.S. and Indian maritime forces and contribute to both sides' ability to counter threats at sea. These engagements also present opportunities to work with other partners. This year's annual Malabar naval exercise was our largest ever, mobilizing over 8,000 personnel, including a U.S. carrier strike group, U.S. and Indian submarines, and P-8 surveillance planes. Reflecting our close cooperation, we now also welcome Japan as a regular participant in the exercise. The benefits of our enhanced coordination were on display following the devastating earthquake in Nepal last year. Within hours of the quake, Indian forces began to mobilize to lead a relief effort. U.S. and Indian militaries worked hand in hand together to rescue stranded civilians and deliver relief supplies to those affected. And in April 2015, the Indian Armed Forces used U.S.-sourced C-17s to evacuate thousands of civilians from war-torn Yemen, comprising citizens from 41 countries, including the United States. Turning to Afghanistan, India has also played an important role in our collective efforts to bring stability and prosperity to that war-torn country, committing more than $2 billion in assistance. In December, Prime Minister Modi dedicated the new Afghan parliament building, a symbol of shared democratic values with that country. And in June, he inaugurated with President Ghani the Afghan-India Friendship Dam in Herat, a major hydroelectric project that supports the livelihood of thousands of Afghans. Over the last few years, we have increased significantly our consultations with India on our shared interests in Afghanistan. The commander of our forces in Afghanistan now regularly travels to New Delhi to exchange views with Indian leaders, as do civilian officials. And just last month in New York, we reconvened for the first time in several years the U.S. India Afghanistan trilateral as a vehicle through which to exchange views on development, political issues, and pressing security matters. Expanding our partnership in the Indian Ocean region, we are also leveraging our strengths trilaterally in Africa. For decades, India has been one of the world's largest contributors of UN peacekeepers, participating in nearly 50 UN missions. Leveraging that expertise, India and the United States are now training peacekeepers from a dozen partner countries in Africa. And 60 years after Dr. Norman Borlaug launched a green revolution in Asia, USAID and India are partnering to support the development cooperation in Africa that trains agricultural professionals at Indian institutions. Okay, turning now specifically to defense. I think it's fair to say the U.S.-India defense relationship has matured more quickly in the last 8 years than at any other period in history. In April, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter returned to India for an unprecedented third visit in less than a year, followed by Defense Minister Parikar's visit to Washington in August of this year. Today, we are sharing technology and linking our defense sectors in a way that is befitting close partners. And the list of agreements on defense and security initiatives concluded over just the past couple of years to make this happen is a very long list indeed. In 2012, Secretary Panetta, then Secretary of Defense, appointed then Deputy Secretary of Defense Ash Carter to lead a bold new initiative known as the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. DTTI was an unprecedented joint endeavor bringing focus to the bilateral defense trade relationship, creating opportunities for U.S.-India co-production and co-development, and streamlining bureaucratic processes and procedures. I was involved in DTTI from the beginning. In fact, as some of you might recall, we originally called it just DTI. And in fact, there was a little bit of a debate between us and the Indians over what that T represented. We called it the Defense Trade Initiative. The Indians like to call it the Defense Technology Initiative. Eventually, through some ingenious bureaucratic innovation, we added a second T, but not after considerable debate and discussion. There still is a little bit of debate as to which T goes first, technology or trade, but we can agree to disagree on that. But more importantly, I think we've come to a common recognition that both of our countries benefit profoundly when we build the kind of trust that's required to share technology and build the kind of openness that's required to trade and invest. DTTI has provided both sides with a greater understanding of our respective systems, and that understanding has fundamentally shifted our approach toward licensing and technology transfer to India. We have overhauled our approach to defense licensing to India with now a presumption of approval for the vast majority of even the most sensitive platforms, in contrast to the presumption of denial this administration inherited. As a result of DTTI, the level of technology provided to India is now commensurate with the partnership we have built and reflects India's status as a major defense partner of the United States. Beyond DTTI, we've put other cooperative architectures in place. In 2013, President Obama and Prime Minister Singh endorsed the India-U.S. Declaration on Defense Cooperation, a document that reflects the U.S. and Indian commitments to a long-term strategic partnership. In 2015, we concluded the 2015 framework for the U.S.-India defense relationship, which will guide and expand our nation's bilateral defense and strategic partnership over the next decade. And just in August this year, we signed the LAMOA, a logistics agreement based on the principle of mutuality that opens up new opportunities for collaboration in the Indian Ocean and much further afield. India will find the United States a steadfast partner in ensuring India has the capabilities and platforms it needs to take on its increasing range of security challenges. Defense trade totals nearly $15 billion cumulatively, including transport planes and attack helicopters, up from nearly zero 10 years ago. Our offer is to provide Indian forces with Apache attack helicopters, the most advanced helicopter in the U.S. inventory, Chinook heavy lift helicopters, and M777 howitzers are akin to our defense relationships with our closest NATO allies, and that is intentional. As a key outcome from President Obama's January 2015 visit to India, the United States and India decided to pursue 4 Pathfinder DTTI projects for possible co-development and/or co-production, as well as cooperation on jet engine technology and even aircraft carriers, an idea that frankly would have been inconceivable in 1971, if you recall what happened then. There is no country in the world that we are supporting in this manner as an emerging global defense leader. This is unique. Never in our history have we actively supported the indigenous development of an aircraft program in any other country. And our discussions today on strengthening cooperation in anti-submarine warfare will provide the next administration with new opportunities to further deepen, no pun intended, deepen our cooperation. Rick, I knew you would like that one. And I presumed only you. So. One focus for the next administration should be to continue integrating India into global supply chains, including in defense, and transferring know-how, not just technology, but systems, architectures, software, and the know-how, tactics, techniques, and procedures. The private sector to private sector links will be absolutely critical in these efforts, and I wish you luck, and I think that will be the area that will see the greatest expansion in the years ahead. As our security partnership continues to evolve, our cooperation on counterterrorism has become a crucial pillar of our broader strategic partnership. This is fitting as the United States and India view acts of terrorism not only as a threat to global peace and security, but also to our common values of democracy, justice, the rule of law, and the protection of every individual. The U.S. India Joint Declaration on Combating Terrorism, agreed by Secretary Kerry and External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj in 2015, our Counterterrorism Joint Working Group, and the Homeland Security Dialogue have expanded our CT cooperation in practical ways that make all of our citizens safer. Since 2009, our U.S. Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program has provided training for more than 1,100 Indian security personnel. In June of this year, the U.S. and India agreed to exchange information on known and suspected terrorists, a decision that will have lasting impacts. And we look forward to welcoming India as a member of the U.S. Global Entry Program in the coming months that will use travel procedures for the nearly 1 million U.S. visits from India each year. Our cooperation also seeks to counter the threat posed by entities such as Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, D Company, and other regional groups that seek to undermine stability in South Asia. It further recognizes the serious threat posed by ISIL, Daesh, to global security and affirms efforts to degrade and defeat this threat in accordance with the provisions of the UN Security Council resolutions. Our two countries now have a strategic cyber partnership that reflects their shared values, a common vision of cyber governance, and shared principles for cyberspace, and is underpinned by the strength of our domestic IT industries and world-leading IT talent. In September of this year, we signed a framework for the U.S. India cyber relationship, the first such framework that the U.S. has signed with any government, reflecting our desire to enhance our already broad-based cooperation on cyber issues. As India continues to expand internet access, invest in its cybersecurity talent, and implement Prime Minister Modi's Digital India strategy, there is great potential for us to ensure that the internet continues to be a source of economic growth and development in our two countries. Our two countries are working together as global leaders in the cyber arena, promoting the voluntary peacetime norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, and supporting the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance, which is so important to keeping the internet open and interoperable so it can continue to benefit us all. In conclusion, as discussed by the previous speakers and in the CS report that you received today, we have come a long way in our security partnership with India. One of the sustaining strengths of this partnership is that it is not underpinned by a treaty, but by our common interests and values. It's voluntary and it continues to grow. This strategic logic is simple, it's bipartisan in both nations, from Clinton and Bush to Obama, from Manmohan Singh to Narendra Modi. The next administration will be able to look at where we have come, even as it continues to chart an ambitious trajectory. I would like to see our two countries adopt more practical collaboration in all domains, in space, in the air, on the seas, under the sea, on land, and in multilateral fora, in ways that respect India's sovereignty, but also reflect our status as increasingly close partners who tackle problems side by side. I would like to see us expand our defense trade in a way that moves beyond transactions toward collaborative production and development, with our private sectors taking the lead. And I'd like to see India increasingly welcomed into our global security discussions on ISIL, peacekeeping, maritime norms, global health, challenges in Europe and Eurasia, and a host of other subjects that are of concern to the United States. We won't always agree, but close partners consult each other on the most important matters. Prime Minister Nehru, in that same speech in 1949, also observed that India is going to be, and is bound to be, a country that counts in world affairs. Not, he said, I hope in the military sense, but in many other senses which are more important and effective in the end. Nehru was right. Today, India does count in world affairs, but it has taken a long time for this aspiration to be realized. And along the way, India has come to understand that the advancement and protection of its increasingly global interests does indeed require the military means to undergird its leadership. That recognition forms a lasting basis for the U.S. India security partnership. And it speaks to the tremendous opportunities awaiting the next administration to advance that partnership in depth, breadth, and vitality. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. I need to get this. Am I on? Yeah, great.
You're always on.
Yeah. It's a dangerous thing to say in this town these days. Yeah. Well, I don't know that we're going to need any questions here because I think Peter pretty much covered the landscape pretty effectively. But all right, I already see that there's going to be a few. There is one other person, though, that was involved in this process that I want to recognize, and you'll see the work in the report. An adjunct fellow for our program at CSIS, Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal, as a way to try to put a finer point on some opportunities for collaboration. We asked him to pull together a number of retired Indian military to look at realistic scenarios about India's potential military deployments and what would be the operational needs, both in terms of equipment, intelligence, and what are the gaps there. So it's another way to kind of look at what the opportunity for collaboration could be, which is to look at things that may actually happen in the near term, hostage situations, hikers in Nepal that get kidnapped, things like that. But let me turn the questioning now over to Peter. I've got a few questions of my own, and then I'll open up to the floor. And we've got a hard stop at 12, so let me pull out the clock here too, just to make sure that we don't keep him over anytime here. Let me start off though by talking about, you've sort of covered this in your remarks. I mean, I think that we had what I would call a relatively dormant period in the latter years of UPA, as started to look a little bit more inward and a little bit less on international cooperation, but a quick escalation in the last couple of years. And so, as a person that's been sort of following this for 20 years now, and you see the ups and downs, I wonder, I mean, do you feel that with everything that we've signed right now, the kind of agreements, the kind of cooperation we've developed, is there enough momentum where even if you don't have a president-prime minister meeting or defense secretary with defense minister meeting right off the bat after this election, is there enough momentum at the working level to maintain the trajectory, or are you going to need something, in your opinion, pretty significant right off the bat? As a good friend of mine, Tessie Schaefer, had once said, it's a relationship that often doesn't thrive on neglect. Do we need something significant right early on, or can working level sustain for a period as we transition to the next administration?
Rick, that's a really good question, and let me say three things in response. So first, I think in the litany of agreements that we've achieved in the last several years, we've created the foundations, whether it's in defense and homeland security, among our intelligence communities, and all aspects of government. We've created the foundations, the agreements for partnership that I'm confident will be sustained for many years to come. So that foundation is reliable, it's sturdy, and it will stand the next administration very well. Secondly, each administration, each government recognizes that our pursuit of our own interests increasingly requires cooperation with each other. Americans recognize that pursuit of our global interests is better, that pursuit is better advanced through partnership with India. And I think that same realization is taking place in India. So our interests and our values make it easy to come together and to build confidence that we're pursuing the same overall objectives. But the third point I'd say really gets to the spirit of your question. Every significant act in global affairs requires leadership. And I do think, and I agree with the spirit of your report, that the next administration will probably need to dedicate the same kind of leadership that President Obama dedicated to this partnership, to expanding this partnership. And I think that will be critically important.
Yeah. Well, and I like hearing particularly with Kath and John confirming that on the president visit, because for an Indiawala, of course, I'm always saying the president should visit every week. That's my job as an India person. But Kath's team having global responsibility and noting that India, that kind of a visit is significant, that puts it in a bit of a global sense there too. All right, second question is going to be a lot more difficult, asking you to pick your favorite child, which no parent wants to do, but all these agreements that
That's an easy one.
All these agreements that have been signed, the Joint Strategic Vision, the new cyber framework, the LAMOA, you look at the group there and you see the chatter from think tanks, from journalists, all sort of judging and saying this is that, trying to offer our own expectations on whether they have near-term impact, long-term impact. Is there one that you think that we've done recently that just didn't get the attention that necessarily deserved? Not saying better than the others, but maybe was signed, was put out there. You can see something in the future that's going to mean a lot that maybe just didn't get picked up by the rest.
You can't pick one. You can't pick one favorite child. You can't pick one favorite agreement, because really they all provide enabling foundations, conditions for more advanced, deeper and expanded cooperation. They're agreements that enable our homeland security agencies to work together, agreements that enable our counterterrorism communities, our intelligence communities, our defense communities to work together, each of the services to work together in new ways. What these agreements do in each and every one of these domains is enables trust and mutual understanding. For the United States, we're a legalistic society. We have a rules-based government and a rules-based foreign policy apparatus. So it's important to sign these documents to provide in our system the kind of confidence and trust that the sensitive information and technology that we transfer will be protected. And I think similarly in India, it instills an understanding of the political commitment that both sides attach to the relationship and the importance attached to that kind of cooperation. So I think each one of these are important, and there'll be others that'll be required to take our defense and other aspects of our partnership to the next level.
Yeah, well, and that's a good flow, I think, into a follow-up question, which is there ever a moment, because we've launched so many boats in so many different areas, we've got DTTI programs, we've got the working groups on technologies, is there ever a moment when attention on signing new things and plunging into the next ground, which of course always excites us, but that should be less attention by the next administration for a bit and a period of consolidating the gains and getting some of these projects across the finish line? Or do you think that there's enough resources on both sides to sort of manage, getting new things done while at the same time completing what's been launched? Should there be a period of slowing down on the new and consolidating what's been done, or can we manage both on both sides, you think, pretty effectively?
Yeah, Rick, I think that's a very reasonable question. And when it comes to building our partnerships with other countries, I think that prioritization and those choices really come into play. But I really want to contrast the relationship with India from the relationship we have with most other countries in the world. This is the most dynamic relationship that we have today. And each of these things we're doing enables us to take this to the next level. And I think we have to simultaneously, and the Obama administration has been simultaneously working on expanding the partnership in new domains. And I highlighted the advances we made just last month in cyber cooperation, for example. The advances we're making even today in countering terrorism. This is important to expand our partnership in ways that had been had been fertile ground but not pursued in the past. But at the same time, we need to deepen that partnership in every one of these areas. We need to pursue the compelling logic of our partnership to do new things and partner in new ways together. So this is a relationship that is pretty unique worldwide, where we can't choose between deepening and broadening. We need to do both simultaneously.
Yeah. Now, I'm often asked to contrast defense and economic relations. It's something that John had touched on as one of the potential risks that we put in the report. On defense, we're signing agreements, we're plunging new ground, now just trying to work on what are the specific areas of cooperation that are going to bring those to light. While on the econ side, huge gap in our approaches to international trade, global issues, but yet there's a lot of things that are actually happening. Trade and investment flows are happening. The difficulties that we have in overcoming this chasm on our approach to WTO, our attempts to negotiate an investment treaty, the fact that we're both part of different emerging trade blocs, is that something that kind of creeps in the security realm, at the National Security Council level, where, we're doing so much good stuff together, but why can't we get it going on trade? Or are those, fairly successfully divorced in leading up to major summits and that kind of thing?
I think these issues they do come together. And I would cite the advances in trade and investment that have been achieved over the past 8 years and even longer. It's natural that the world's largest economy and the world's fastest growing economy ought to come together. But I think there are many investors, and private industry is probably disappointed that these connections have not happened fast enough. And I think much to the detriment of the economic prosperity and wherewithal of each of our countries, and in fact the global economy. So that's an area that will continue to require attention. And frankly, we have to recognize we're taking very dissimilar approaches to trade and investment. and trying to bring them together and identify convergences. And I think that process is still ongoing. In contrast, the convergences that I highlighted in my talk in the security area, both in traditional hard security areas, but also in new forms of security, climate change, global health, and other areas, that is quickly being identified and realized. So I think the pace there is growing more quickly than on the economic sphere. I don't see it necessarily competitive, but as I mentioned in talking about the potential of DTTI and defense trade and investment and technology exchange, that will only really be realized in the way we've established the foundation for when the private sector is able to interact with the Indian private sector and Indian government in a way that will truly be transformational. And that will require a convergence on the economic side to match the convergence on the security side.
Yeah, good. Well, with that, let me open it up to the floor here for questions that people have, either on the report, which I can cover, or kick over to John if it's too tough for my little brain. But specifically, of course, having Peter on stage is a unique opportunity. So I'd like to hear as many questions that people have that he'd be comfortable asking. So if I can ask you to please let us know which organization you represent in your name, and please try to keep it to a brief question rather than a lengthy question or a statement of your own feelings and beliefs. Yeah, I see all the way in the back, Verghese. Yeah. We have microphones coming around too, by the way.
My name is Verghese George. I write for the Indian newspaper, The Hindu. My question is to Mr. Lavoy. India has made a shift in its regional policy recently, as you may have noticed. How does it impact US's relationship with India? Does it complicate US's own calculus vis-a-vis South Asia in any way?
Verghese, could I just ask you to clarify? You mentioned that India has made a shift in its own regional policy.
Yeah,
could you elaborate what you mean? And use the mic, please.
I'm referring to the cross-border, the cross-LOC operation that Indian forces did recently.
I shouldn't have asked.
It's the border with Bangladesh. They just
Thank you for that question. As I noted in my talk, the U.S. and India do indeed have a shared interest in countering terrorism, in protecting our societies from the scourge of terrorism, and working together to diminish the ability of terrorist groups to threaten our countries or others around the world. You might have noticed the White House issue a statement after Ambassador Rice, the National Security Advisor, had a discussion with her counterpart, Mr. Doval, the Indian National Security Advisor, in which we condemned this act of cross-border terrorism from Pakistan coming across to Indian territory and killing, I think it's now 19 soldiers, I think, at the Army base in Uri. It was a horrific attack. We condemned it immediately, and you noted in her comments condemning the cross-border threat. I think every country has a right to self-defense, but I also highlight that in a heavy militarized relationship like that of India and Pakistan, a relationship that has experienced at least 3 or 4 wars in the past, and frankly, where forces along the LOC and the international border are on hair-trigger alert, there really is a need for caution and prudence on both sides. So we do understand the very serious concern and attention by the Indian government to this attack, to this horrific attack. We share in India a strong commitment to preventing future attacks like this from occurring, and are working together and working with other parties in the region and internationally to ensure that that's the case. And we do empathize with the Indians' perception that they need to respond militarily. But again, I want to highlight our strong interest in seeing caution prevail.
Yeah, up in the front row here, third row.
Hi, good morning. My name is Fatima, and I'm coming from Georgetown. I'm a master's student at the School of Foreign Service. And just on that same note, could you speak to the U.S.-Pakistan-India relationship and how has the U.S. been able to balance the two contentious nations, nations in this administration? This will help me with the paper I'm writing, actually. So if you could talk about that a little bit. Thank you.
Well, Fatima, thank you. I think we really need you to finish that paper because this is an area where we could really use some help. So hurry up and get that done and send it in to us. But I think, South Asia is not unique. There are other parts of the world where you have bilateral or regional relationships that are really born in conflict and friction and tension and have unfortunately not found a way to transform themselves, to transcend those frictions, whether they're border disputes, concerns about ethnic populations, religious populations, or other issues that from time to time can be so divisive. India and Pakistan have that friction-filled relationship, and they have not found a way to overcome their differences. We don't try to balance India and Pakistan. I think probably in previous years, different U.S. governments have tried to balance these two. That is not the approach of this government. We pursue our interests and promote our values and our relations with each country around the world independently. We try to find areas where those interests converge, and that is a strong desire by this administration as others before us. We find that the most complex problems, whether they're caused by terrorism or cyber insecurity and so forth, are best dealt with in a multilateral framework, at least in a regional framework where every party is working together. And I find that we've experienced that in South Asia. That level of cooperation has been very hard to develop. It's regrettable that the SARC meeting, the SARC summit, the annual summit of the South Asian sort of regional grouping, was not able to be held this year. And in fact, SARC has not lived up to the potential that we've seen other regional groupings. ASEAN is a notable bright light where that grouping has enabled countries that had similar frictions, similar border disputes, ethnic concerns, and other problems at the time ASEAN was created, but SARC is not able to provide that transformative effect on the relationships. I think, the bottom line is we do not try to balance this relationship. I think it's understandable, it should be understandable to you that so much of my talk, so much of what President Obama has done, so much of the time we're spending is on deepening the expanding array of interests and values we have with India. We wish that were to be the case with Pakistan, and we work very hard with Pakistan to turn that into a productive, mutually beneficial relationship. And I'm sure the next administration will continue these tendencies. Thanks.
I'll just add a quick two-finger on that too. I think there's a growing recognition from Delhi. This isn't a decision that will be made in DC in a vacuum in how we balance the two. And so all these areas of cooperation has strengthened Delhi's voice in Washington as well, which is not unrelated to this point of how we approach the two. Yeah, front row right here. Yeah, wait for the microphone, come over here. Yeah, great, thanks. I know. We have video cameras and
all
everything.
Punjabis are loud.
Recorded for prosperity here.
Right. Dr. Lavoy, Dr. Peter Lavoy. Dr. Lavoy, my question is, have you seen the latest...
if you could let us know, we know, but yeah.
I'm sorry. My name is Ramesh Kapoor. I am the president of U.S. India Security Council. My question is, have you seen the latest India language in the NDA 17, the final language in the conference committee? India-related defense language.
Is there a question?
Yeah, go ahead and make your...
I'm asking.
Is this just a kind of true or false question? Or
No. Have you seen the language? I mean, there's a language
but is there a question that you have?
Yeah, I'm asking you, have you seen the latest
NDA.
language?
Yes.
Can you comment on it?
What specifically would you like a comment on?
The defense language, the 2000 NDA
I know, but
language has in the
what
conference
particular
committee.
aspect?
Huh?
Well, it's a voluminous product. What particular aspect would?
The defense language that's in the NDA 2017 in the conference committee.
But is there a line or is there a thrust of the bill that you're asking about?
The NDA 2017. There's an India-centric language in the NDA 2017.
If you could identify the language, I'd be happy to offer a comment.
Okay, maybe after that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
That will go just right behind in the second row there. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Isabella Varenga, and I'm with the Medill News Service. And I'm just wondering, how critical do you think this current presidential election is for the future of U.S.-India security cooperation?
I've got to be careful on this one. Let me just say, I think this presidential election is critically important to the entire world and everything in it.
But that's all. Yeah. On this side, Seema? Yeah, for the fourth row back on the
I
row.
thought the ground rules were no SEMA questions.
Sorry. I just saw a hand over there. I didn't know who that was.
Seema Siroi, I'm a columnist for Indian newspapers. Peter, there were two envoys from Pakistan recently whom you met, and Mushahid Hussain said that Afghanistan will continue to burn till Kashmir burns. So basically he was connecting peace and stability in Afghanistan to Kashmir. What's your reaction to that? And also if you could tell us what his message was to you when you met.
Well, Seema, thank you for the question. And I was joking about Seema. She's a longtime friend and does a great job in the Washington journalist community. Always asks the tough questions, too. Absolutely, we meet envoys of every country, anybody carrying a message from their government. We are about open communication. We feel that all challenges and problems are only addressed through communication and honest sharing of information. Senator Mushahid Hussain, as you indicated, was in Washington last week. He met a number of officials, including in the U.S. administration. And he carried messages from his prime minister. But as in other government-to-government exchanges, I would leave it to him to characterize his view. It's not for me to characterize the message that the communication that we had that was meant to be a confidential government-to-government communication. But to get to the early part of your question, we certainly don't believe that the situation in Afghanistan is linked with situation in Kashmir. We're very concerned about bringing peace and stability and eventually economic prosperity to all Afghans. That's a very, very tall order. Afghanistan has been afflicted by war and human suffering for too many decades. And this is a real priority of this administration to provide the kind of political and economic and security support and all dimensions of support to Afghanistan to help uplift them out of war and suffering and poverty. And I'm pleased to note that just last week there was a major conference in Brussels where leaders from around the world, foreign ministries mainly, but other world leaders, converged and created a commitment to continue providing economic assistance to Afghanistan at really an amazing amount for another 4 years. So I think everyone in the world recognizes the unique localized challenges that Afghanistan faces, and together are committed to working together to help alleviate those problems.
Got a couple over on this section here, right next to each other.
My name is Akriti Vasudeva. I'm Research Associate at the Stimson Center. I was wondering what your thoughts were on the recommendation of the CSIS report about a quadrilateral dialogue with U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, and what issues do you see being discussed in a dialogue like that? Thanks.
I think Frankly, all of the ideas in the report are very, very good ideas, and they're ideas we should, we should look at very seriously, including in this administration. The next administration will take this on, but your report, the really rigorous analysis provided in the report and the recommendations are things we'll take very seriously. As I mentioned in my remarks, and John Schaus mentioned in his summary of the report, we already have a very vibrant trilateral cooperation between the United States, India, and Japan. There's no reason that other countries can't join in on this partnership. We'll leave that to particular ministries and leaders to determine when the appropriate time is, when you have the right confluence of factors for that convergence at that level. But I would say that in my remarks, I mentioned particularly in the Indian Ocean region, there is a very thin architecture. You don't have the benefits of the big, robust, and growing ASEAN architecture as you do in Southeast Asia, for example. And so I think there's a recognition that dealing with some of the challenges and pursuing the opportunities in that part of the world will require increasing convergence and partnerships among a number of countries. Notably, the U.S., India, and Japan have recognized this and are working together in this region and beyond. And I think other countries should in fact join this kind of thinking and these kinds of groupings.
Yeah, we do fully recognize getting 4 countries to commit their leadership at the same time, all looking at the security arrangements across Asia in the same viewpoint at the same time. It's a perfect mixture, but keeping eyes open for when that opportunity takes advantage. So it wasn't just a dream scenario, but we know it's difficult to get 4 countries moving at the same time, but well worth taking a stab. I saw a few other hands right behind. Yep.
Thank you. Laura Delgado Lopez with Harris Corporation. The report also mentioned space cooperation, particularly in weather, and I was curious if you thought that at this point needed to be government to government, NASA, ISRO, as you mentioned in your remarks, or if there were opportunities for the private sector to contribute to that.
I definitely think there are opportunities. I think you've probably seen the reports of President Obama, who is focused on advancing the commercialization, the appropriate commercialization of space. It is a new domain in which private entities, private business will find opportunities to work together. And I think it's an area where U.S. and Indian businesses could identify great opportunities for collaboration.
All the way in the back, Lalit.
Thank you. This is Lalit Jha from PTI, Press Trust of India. Do you think you are going to leave India's NSG membership to the next administration, or this would be accomplished the rest of the year?
So you're referring to, for those not versed in all the acronyms, you're referring to India's membership bid for the Nuclear Suppliers Group. I think as you should be familiar, and others should be as well, President Obama has indicated the strong U.S. commitment to helping India join the Nuclear Suppliers Group during this year, during the Obama administration. We believe that India, inside the Nuclear Suppliers Group, it will create an opportunity for India to exhibit the leadership in non-proliferation, new opportunity to exhibit leadership in non-proliferation that it's demonstrated in many, many years. And I think if you just look back, as I mentioned in my remarks, the nuclear issue was really the issue that created the most friction in the relationship between the United States and India for, frankly, many decades. Going back to the 1970s when India had its first peaceful nuclear experiment in 1974. And since then, this was the major friction point. But I think there are compliments due to the Bush administration that concluded the first civil nuclear deal with India. And then in 2008, there was an agreement reached with the Nuclear Suppliers Group to provide an exception for India to enable the transfer of peaceful nuclear technology and materials to India under safeguards. That was a landmark deal. And similarly, I think in this year, in 2016, India ought to join the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and every effort is being made to ensure that India can occupy a place of leadership inside the NSG this year.
Dave, in the back.
Hi, Peter. Dave Ramaswamy, Indus Latin Ventures. My question is about Syria. Given the diplomatic impasse currently in place and continuing military hostilities, India has strong relationships with Russia, the Arab world, and has played a key role in reconstruction in Afghanistan, and is the biggest contributor to UN peacekeeping forces. So given India's track record here, where do you see US and India coming together to resolve the conflict in Syria? Thank you.
Thank you. That's, I mean, you're obviously talking about a very tough challenge. It's one that's really seizing the attentions and the concerns of leaders all around the world. And that is, and India and the United States obviously are no exceptions to that. I would put this question in a broader context. As you're all aware, and it's been a focus of your report and a focus of my remarks and other statements by the US government and the Indian government, our convergence with India has been easiest, quickest, and really most monumental in the Asia-Pacific region. Increasingly, we are talking about doing things and actually doing things under our joint strategic vision, also in the Indian Ocean region. But the US-India partnership is a global partnership. It is not a partnership limited to the subcontinent. It's not a partnership limited to the Pacific. It's not a partnership limited to the Indian Ocean region. Increasingly, it will be a partnership that plays out globally, including on the most daunting challenges in the world like Syria. So I expect this is an area where we should expect, and the next administration will probably drive, greater convergence of our policies and approaches and collaborative problem solving and opportunity seeking, including in this part of the world.
Hey, you'll see we covered this topic to some extent in the report as well, talking about the real convergence of interest across the Middle East. Something that came up very prominently in the study group visit that we took last September. The Indian side saying they had such dramatic interest across the Middle East, but very little capacity to influence or even to understand what was happening there. So that's one that we cover as well in the report. I don't know if Seattle Seahawks questions are inbounds or out of bounds, but Robin up here, I saw his hand up. Bow tie questions or whatever he's got on his mind right now.
I'm Robin Walker. Among other things, I'm a former student of Peter's. Your description of the relationship of the two countries seemed an awful lot like two people trying to convince each other that they don't really need to get married. We wake up every day and we have to prove that we still love each other. So India is currently, I describe it as a major non-NATO, non-ally. Do you think that pursuing India as a formal treaty ally would be something that's in the cards down the road? I know India has a lot of resistance to that with the non-aligned past, but is that somewhere we're going that we've considered discussing? Should that be on the agenda for the next administration? Thanks.
Robin, we have many things in common. Not only we had a kind of faculty-student relationship, we both went to Oberlin College, and we both learned there that marriage is optional. Now my wife didn't go to Oberlin, so for me it's not optional. It's a very secure bond.
That's called compromise.
But we're in a different era today. I mean, in the 21st century, I think the era of alliances, this is not the era we're in today. We're in the era of identifying interests, common values, and working together to solve those problems. I don't think that anyone in the United States government or the Indian government feels any compulsion at all to form a treaty alliance. Why have that shackle? I think the friends with benefits model is probably satisfactory, but I would highlight a phrase that I think should not be underestimated: major defense partner. So I think there was an understanding or a growing perception that we've been doing so much together, we've been sharing so much together, we've expanded and deepened the boundaries of cooperation. But there was not a brand or a phrase or some term that codified what that relationship was about. And I think the, mutually agreeing on the concept major defense partner, I think is a very apt description. It was largely driven by the extent and deepening cooperation. As I mentioned, India achieves a success rate of over 99% in licenses applied for. That's really astounding. There are other kinds of technology that I mentioned that we're transferring much more easily and readily than ever before. So there are very significant changes to our own policies and rules and procedures that enable this defense partnership. But I think it's a concept that also will expand to the kinds of cooperation that we're now pursuing in other areas, including counterterrorism, cyber defense, and other areas. So I think this is sufficient. At some point, if Indian and American leaders feel there's a need to further codify this relationship, why not? But I think each side is very satisfactory and pleased with the arrangement.
You mentioned a number of things in your remarks too that we've created just with India. The cyber framework that we've signed, the India Rapid Reaction Cell, DTTI, so there may be even some treaty allies that look across and think, why can't I have what they've done with India? So there's benefits to kind of both. We've got time for one last question, and I see Rahul Madhavan had raised his hand. You still have, Rahul joined us for the study group visit out there last year, so Rahul, you get the last shot here for pinning Peter to the wall and asking the toughest question of all.
Thank you, Rick. I'm Rahul Madhavan with AECOM. I'd like to first just thank you for your work and analysis and your teams with CSIS on this report. And Dr. Lavoy, you and the administration, you have made incredible strides, and the leadership potential you've talked about has been very, very visible both across industry as well as all of those here who follow this relationship so closely. But on this concept of leadership, which you talked about being so necessary for the next administration, we've seen that a closeted relationship of sorts coming out of the sanctions era in the post-2000 realm has been one that allowed for the relationship to mature to where it is today, and I'm speaking in broad strokes. But more importantly, over the past few years, you've seen this emergence of the Indian establishment making those requests and making those kinds of movements and sort of undulations, if you will, towards what they require out of the U.S.-India relationship. They're acting a little bit more, one could say, strategically. What would you say are some of the highlights of India's motions towards the United States in terms of requests for support, whether militarily, whether in human assistance and disaster relief, whether in cybersecurity cooperation, in gender equality issues, USAID type support issues? Where are some of the issues you're seeing India being leaders on when requesting something out of the U.S.-India relationship?
Well, thanks for that question. I think it's an important question. And I would say, in just reflecting on, working on the relationship with India and the U.S. government in many capacities, the Defense Department, I was in the intelligence community, and now at the White House, we've really transformed our relationship. It was a relationship that was full of friction and very contentious for many years, for many decades. We pulled out of that phase, as you refer to, but it was still very transactional. Now it truly is strategic, and we think of how the other side would react and think first. Now, each side does, and India does raise issues with us. We raise issues with India. But I think the different thing that's happening today is before they even ask us for something, we're already anticipating what does our major defense partner need? What would our major defense partner want? We're already putting ourselves in that mindset. And here I really want to give compliments to there are many people in this audience, but including people that are not here in the U.S. government. Whether it's in the intelligence community that helps us understand and provides early warning of the kinds of challenges that we're likely to confront. So well before those challenges even arise, we're already working with India to try to prevent these things from occurring. If you get to a point where India has to ask, I think that's we haven't done something right in our system. But I really want to thank the intelligence community for really helping us be aware of that future world and working together. Also, State Department, Defense Department, Commerce Department, Treasury, Homeland Security, and there are many other agencies and departments that come together, and each of them now has instilled this thinking about the critical importance of this partnership and have internalized thinking about India's interests, thinking about our joint interests as a driving force in how we do business. That is completely transformational. That was not the case even at the beginning of the Obama administration. It's something that's happened since. So when we get together in interagency meetings and talk about a problem, every department, every agency has already come to the meeting, has already prepared ideas about how they could deal with it. And I think the most recent case where India's vital interests are at stake in the recent terrorist attack, which is only one, the most recent in a whole series of terrorist attacks, I think is a perfect case in point.
Well, let me conclude by both praising, but then also raising a complaint with Peter. The complaint being that writing this report was difficult because you were doing so much so fast that every time we thought we had some interesting recommendations to push the envelope, you pushed it past what we were going to recommend. So keeping abreast.
But just on this point, I mean, this is the greatest testimony to a think tank. Your whole work forced us to move faster. So that was our objective. We were measuring ourselves to stay one step ahead of you. And I mentioned the intelligence community, but I won't go there.
Then also, Peter, to say thanks both for your counsel during this process, but also for you coming and helping us to launch the report today and offering your remarks. So please join me in thanking Peter for coming out.
Thank you.